Okay, there we go. So good evening, everyone. Big mistake, big, huge. Oh, I love it. I love it, Adrian. I love that part of the movie too. I love it. Well, I know, let me digress a little bit. My favorite part of the movie is when first when she's singing Prince with the headphones with the Walkman, right? She's sitting in the tub and he proposes like how much he's going to pay her for the week, and she like dunks herself in the bathtub. My other favorite part of the movie is when she's sitting there in the bar and she's waiting on him, and she took her wig off and she has the red hair and it's like curly and tied up, and she's got on that pretty black dress that she bought that people didn't want to, give her service. And she's sitting there waiting and he was late, and she turns around. Oh my God, I just love that movie. He was like, "You're late." And she says, "You're stunning." Favorite part of that movie, y'all. Anyway, I may go watch that tonight. So anyway, I have it on VHS though, so I don't know if I have a VHS player handy. But tonight we're going to be talking about overthinking, y'all. Overthinking. One of my new favorite books is called Soundtracks. It's by John Acuff, and he was on our Plexus Book Club a couple months ago, and I like raved about him. I was like, y'all got to go look at the replay. They don't keep the replays, y'all. So if you get on the book club for Plexus, you really need to go back and look at the replays. If you can't hop on that Saturday, you need to go back and look at the replays within a week because they go away. So tonight I'm going to be talking to you about overthinking, and his whole book, Soundtracks, is about overthinking. Okay. So we're going to be talking about soundtracks as it relates to overthinking. So the most expensive thing that he said companies invest in is overthinking. How many of y'all would agree with that? Like, companies spend probably hundreds of millions of dollars every year on people to sit at their jobs and overthink things, right? Overthink the decisions they're making, overthink how they're going to type the email up, overthink how they're going to create a presentation, overthink how they're going to discuss a hard topic with their boss. Like, tons and tons and tons of hours are spent and wasted on overthinking. This is what happens in corporate America every day. And guess what, guys? In the industry of network marketing, it's no different for us. We spend thousands upon thousands of hours overthinking. Do I want to send her this message? Oh, how do I want to send the message? Oh, I haven't talked to her in 20 years. I mean, how do I message her? What do I say? Do I want to comment on her post? Oh my gosh, she hasn't ordered in 6 months. Do I really want to actually act like I like her anymore? Like, we do this all day long. Overthinking steals time, it steals productivity, and it steals creativity. Okay. I need y'all to understand the big predicament that we find ourselves in because we overthink. Okay. The definition of overthinking, this is the working definition of overthinking based on this book that I read by John Acuff, Soundtracks. It's when what you think gets in the way of what you want. How many of you, by show of hands in the comments or just a yes, how many of you struggle with what you're thinking in your head getting in the way of what you want? Absolutely. I would say that's like 100% of us. All of us struggle with this. It is a daily struggle, y'all, that we have things in our head that we're thinking, and it gets in the way of what we really want. Okay. His study showed that 99.5% of people overthink. 99.5. That's 100% basically of the population overthinks. Okay. But the great news is this. Okay. I read a couple of books about this topic, neuroplasticity. Okay. That we can actually change the shape and function of our brain. And our generation knows this. Like 2 or 3 generations ago, it was not a known, scientifically proven concept that you could change your brain. Remember back in the day when we were kids 30, 40 years ago in school, and you would see kids, no, this is not a slight on anyone that may have a kid that rode the short bus. Remember, we would see the kids that rode the short bus, right? And we would think, oh my gosh, like, that's just who they're going to be for the rest of life. 30, 40 years ago, we thought that those kids were those kids. Well, that's not the case anymore because we realize that you can do so much to change your brain, no matter how you were born. You can change your brain. And just like someone that may grow up with some health challenges or developmental challenges, how they can change their brain and it can develop and grow stronger, and they can have they have less limitations than we used to place on kids with that had developmental disabilities. We place so many more limitations on kids 30 years ago than we do now, right? Do y'all realize that? And so thinking about that, just think about us as adults, like functioning adults, like we can change our brains. Okay. And so you can change your thoughts. And one thing he said that really resounded with me when I read the book and then when I saw him on the book study call is he talked about if you can worry, you can wonder. And if you can doubt, you can dominate. I want y'all to write that down. If you can worry, you can wonder. And if you can doubt, you can also dominate. Okay. It's literally about making a decision to change the way you think. Okay. So I want you to really consider this. Okay. How many of you believe that you have a soundtrack for your marriage? You have a soundtrack for your business. You've created a soundtrack for your career, your 9 to 5. You've also created a soundtrack for all your other relationships in your life. You've also created a soundtrack for your hopes and dreams. The choice is yours because guess who's created those soundtracks? Like I'm listening to Roxette and from Pretty Woman soundtrack, and I didn't create the soundtrack, but it's nice to listen to. But you have full control over your soundtrack that you have created for your life, your relationships, your marriage, your business, your dreams and hopes, your career. You have control over that. A soundtrack is simply a repetitive thought. Okay, that's all it is. A soundtrack is a repetitive thought. So if you listen to anything, any thought long enough, so think about in your brain, if you're listening to a thought long enough, it becomes a part of your personal playlist, y'all. Like legitimately, it becomes a part of your personal playlist. So there was a study that John Acuff did where there were 2 groups of sentences, okay, that were, and there are 2 groups of people, and there were sentences that they were given, words that they were given, and they were actually asked, these 2 groups of people were asked to make sentences out of these group of words. Excuse me, it was a group of words that they were given, different groups of words, okay? And what they found is they timed how long it took them. And what they found is that great thoughts, so all these words were scattered, all these words were given to both groups. And one of the groups created really great and positive thoughts, and one of the groups created more negative thoughts. Okay. And what they found is that great thoughts lead to great action because the study didn't end there. The study then continued where these individuals had to work together for a certain period of time and they matriculated on through this study. And what they realized is that the people that initially created these great thoughts through these random, sampling of words that they were given, that turned into great action, right? And great action then led to great results. Okay. So I want you to think about the loudest soundtrack you have in your life. Think about the loudest soundtrack you have in your life. Okay. I don't know what that is for you, but whatever the loudest soundtrack is, I want you to ask yourself, is it true? I also want you to ask yourself these 3 questions. Okay. Are you willing to retire that broken soundtrack? Okay. Because if you have the loudest soundtrack, for most people, we tend to bend on the negative side, honestly. If the loudest soundtrack in your life is a negative soundtrack, okay, are you willing to retire the broken soundtrack? That's the first question I want you to ask yourself. Are you willing to replace the broken soundtrack with the new soundtrack? And then I also want you to think about if you are willing to replace it, even though it may seem difficult, because in your mind, you're probably like, but I've been playing the same soundtrack in my head for like 20 years, whether it's like a really difficult marriage or a really strained relationship with your family, or it's, you've been in the same job for 15 years and you just don't know how to get out. They keep promoting you just enough for you not to quit. Like, whatever that soundtrack is, you need to ask yourself, are you willing to replace it with a new soundtrack? And then you have to be willing to repeat that soundtrack until it's automatic. You know how you repeat something over and over and over again, and it literally becomes like, you know, every word, you know, every beat, you know, every rhythm, you know, every single thing about that soundtrack. It needs to become automatic. Okay. I also want you to ask yourself these three questions regarding your loudest soundtrack again. Okay. I want you to think about your loudest soundtrack. If your loudest soundtrack happens to be negative, okay, so let's just say you have a soundtrack that my marriage is never going to get any better. If that's your soundtrack, okay, that you have in your brain and you keep replaying that, I want you to ask yourself, or let's give a different example that relates more to the business. If you think in your head, oh my goodness, I just don't have enough influence. I don't have enough influence to build this business the way I want to build this business. Okay. If you said that to a friend, would they still be your friend? That's what I want you to ask yourself. Okay. That's really the litmus test is if you should be saying it to yourself, is if you would say it to your friend. Would you tell your friend, you just don't have enough influence? You just don't have enough influence. Like I don't know how to help you because you just don't have enough influence. You would never tell your friend that. So if you would never tell your friend that, then why are you telling yourself that? These are the things we do. We struggle with these negative soundtracks that we play in our heads constantly. We honestly do it subconsciously, right? So I want you to ask yourself, if the soundtrack is negative, I want you to question yourself and say, is the soundtrack true? Okay. Is the soundtrack helpful? And is it kind? Is the soundtrack true? Is it helpful? And is it kind? Most of the time, if you're a really good friend, you're not going to tell your friend a lie, hopefully, right? You're going to be truthful and honest with your friend. Okay. You're going to be helpful when you speak to your friend, and you're going to, in your best possible way, in all circumstances, you're going to be kind. So if you're not speaking to yourself that way, if you're not speaking to your friends that way, then you definitely shouldn't be speaking to yourself that way. Okay. We assume all of our thoughts are true. That's the crazy thing. You know how you say, well, that's my opinion. How many of you kind of get in the habit of saying, well, it's my opinion. It's my opinion. And you feel like I'm entitled to my opinion. And what people don't understand is that, well, we automatically assume that our opinions are true, but just because it's your opinion doesn't make it true. Feelings aren't facts. Okay. So I really want you to understand that your thoughts, right, are not always true. We assume that our thoughts are true because there are our thoughts, right? But just because they're our thoughts doesn't make them true. Feelings are not facts. This is something you really have to grasp, okay? You do need to think about, though, do your thoughts push you forward or do they pull you back? That's a big sign for you to really, really understand whether or not you overthink too much. Is just think take that thought captive. That's biblical. Take the thought captive and then think about, is this thought pushing me forward or is it pulling me back? If it's pulling you back, then it's time to start thinking about retraining your brain. Okay. Now, something that I want to also share with you before I go into the 6 steps for like taking your thoughts captive and stopping this whole cycle of overthinking, is one of the things that he studied was great teams. He studied a ton of corporations. He studied a lot of businesses. And he said, in a great team, you can ask questions, you can suggest new ideas, and you can admit that you're wrong. So think about that as you're building your own team. Okay. And your team, is it okay for your downline to come to you and ask questions? Is it okay for them to suggest new ideas to you? Is it okay for them to admit? And is it okay for you primarily to admit that you're wrong? If you're leading a team, you have to be willing to not only receive, but do those things on a consistent basis. Okay. I want you to think about this idea that thoughts come by choice or chance. Are you allowing your thoughts to come by chance? Are you allowing your thoughts to come by choice? That's the amazing thing about your brain. It's neuroplastic. So you have a choice of how you shift the way you think, how you literally change your brain. So your thoughts can come by chance or they can come by choice. What are you going to do? Are you going to choose your thoughts? I'm making a conscious effort every day to choose my thoughts. Okay. So you are 100% of the people that you have 100% control over. That's what I love about this business. That's why I always say, if it's to be, it's up to me. You're 100% of the people you have 100% control over. You do not, literally, including your children. I figured that out today, and I figure that out every day with my own doggone kids, that I don't have 100% control over them. As much as I would like to have 100% control over them, I do not have 100% control over them. The only person I have 100% control over is myself. Okay. You have 100% control over 100% you. That's it. You are 100% of the people that you have 100% control over. That's it. You and nobody else. Okay. So the thing that really baffles me about people in this business, not only in this business, but people that we prospect in our business and people that come to join to take the products and get healthier, is that a lot of times we've given a problem 10 years to develop, but we don't want to give it 10 years of solutions. Okay. I'm going to say that again, because I really want y'all to think about this. There's a lot of you that are on the fence. You hopped on this call. You're like, oh, that's an interesting topic. She's talking about overthinking. Yeah, overthink. I guess I want to hear a couple things that she has to say. But you're already on the fence about whether or not you want to continue to commit to your business. You're already on the fence, but you're like, oh, I've got this big thing coming up. Oh, I've got this other commitment now. I just don't know that I can make the commitment that I said I wanted to in my business. And so you think about this idea of you've given the problem 10 years to develop, but the solution 10 days. Help me make that make sense. If you have a why to get out of debt and be able to pay for your child's college education, and be able to build a dream home for your family, and be able to retire debt free and not pass on debt to your children, if those are dreams that you have in your heart, and wow, like, I want to do some things differently in my generation, in my family. I want to change my family lineage, right? I want to create generational wealth. I want to be able to pass something down to my kids. You have 20, 40, 50, 60 years of problems, right, in your family, of people not being good stewards of their money, people, robbing Peter to pay Paul. You got all this stuff going on, maybe stuff that you just inherited. Maybe you didn't even create the problem, but it's 10 years, 20 years, 50 years of problems that you've inherited, but you've given 10 days for you to create a solution. And this is like an analogy, right? Because clearly I know anybody that's been on this call has been doing plexus more than 10 days, but you ain't been doing plexus for 10 years, because I haven't been doing plexus for 10 years. So you've had these problems and these issues and these generational curses and all these strongholds, things that you got to break down. And it's taken 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years accumulation for that to happen. And then you're going to give yourself 10 days, comparatively speaking, for something change, some big miraculous change to happen in your life. That's not how this works, y'all. And so you have control over that thought. You do. You have control over that thought. Okay. When you don't work on your thinking, guys, guess what it tends to skew? Where do you think it tends to skew if you don't work on your thinking? It's going to skew negative. That is our natural bent. I love this part of Pretty Woman too. This was not a part of my talk tonight, but I'm just now thinking of it. The other favorite part of this movie is when Julia Roberts is sitting in bed with Richard Gere, and she's saying that she was talking about her childhood and her upbringing, and she was saying that, man, he was saying something kind to her, and he said, man, I always believed this about myself as a kid. And she said, it's always easy to believe the bad stuff. You could hear 5 billion great things about yourself and one bad thing, and you're only going to remember the bad thing. Remember she said that in that movie? This is the same thing. This is the same thing. What are the new thoughts that you want? I really want you to write that down. What are the new thoughts that you want? I want you to reflect on this over the week, and I want you to think about, what are the new thoughts that you want? If you don't even know what new thoughts you want, think about maybe the last conflict you had. Think about the last relational issue that you had. That will help you to start to realize what new thoughts you want. Think about the last issue you had in your business and how you were thinking at that moment. What is the new thought that you want? Okay. Let your thoughts work for you, not against you. So many of us are letting our thoughts work against us. We're letting our thoughts work against us and not for us. The other thing that people really struggle with, and this is totally my struggle because I'm a Enneagram 1. If you have not studied the Enneagram, read The Road Back to You, it's an amazing book, amazing personality typing system. And one of the things that John Acuff talked about in this book, Soundtracks, he says, perfectionism is a poison that pretends to be a vitamin. I'm going to say that again. Perfectionism is a poison that pretends to be a vitamin. As an Enneagram 1, I'm a perfectionist. But one thing I had to get over in this business is, Robin, it's not always going to be perfect. You have to delegate. You have to allow people to raise their own leadership lid. You have to allow things to happen and mistakes to be made, and you be able to fail forward. You have to do this in this type of business. That's the only way that you attain success. So perfectionism is a poison that pretends to be a vitamin. So you think, oh my gosh, I want it to be perfect. Like I don't want to do my first team call because I want it to be perfect. I don't know everything. Or I don't want to do my launch event because I just don't know that I'm going to actually say the right things when I hop on this call. Or I want to have the perfect testimony, so I'm not going to share until I have that perfect testimony. Anybody relate? Anybody relate? I'm not going to go live until, oh my gosh, I go get my hair done and I have perfect makeup and I do all these things. I'm not going to do any of those things. It's called Soundtracks, Stacey. Soundtracks by John Acuff, Jonacuff, I believe. And I'm telling you, perfectionism is literally that. It's a poison that pretends to be a vitamin. So it's like, you can act all day long, like you want it to be perfect and act like, oh, this is a vitamin. This is healthy for me. No, it's not. It's a poison. Because only God is perfect, right? We're never going to achieve perfectionism. It's an endless fight. We're never going to get there. Okay. We're never going to get there. So I want you to think about this. I always talk about failing forward because you fail when The Road Back to You. Yes. That's the Enneagram book, The Road Back to You. Sorry, Summer. Thanks for clarifying. Fear should get a voice, but fear should not get a vote. So it is very normal for us to have fears. Okay. That is a normal thing. It's a healthy thing to be fearful. That means you're growing. That means you're stepping outside of your comfort. If you never have any fears, that means you're just doing stuff within your own will. You're not doing anything at all in your life that will require supernatural power. And that's a problem, right? Because you want to be doing things that will stretch your faith, that will build your faith, that will strengthen your faith. The only way that you could do that is going after big, hairy, audacious goals, going after things that you can't do in your own strength, that you have to have the Lord to help you to do. And so when you think about being fearful about doing something, it's okay for fear to have a voice, but it's not okay for fear to have a vote. Because if you allow fear to always have a vote in your life, you're always going to be timid and you're always going to hold back. You're always never going to go for the gusto. You're always going to be super timid, super inhibited by everything that you do in life, right? So fear gets a voice, but it does not get a vote, okay? The other thing about broken soundtracks, these negative soundtracks in our lives, is they tend to talk in absolutes. When you think about a broken soundtrack, there's a lot of times it's like you'll hear these words like always, sometimes never, these absolute superlative words. But that's never the case, right? We all know that. That's never the case. Fear is good because it will teach you things, and it's also a big part of self-awareness. So this is something I step into a lot. I step into a lot of having very difficult conversations. Like I force myself to have difficult conversations on a very regular basis. Like when I'm up against conflict and in a business with people, lots and lots of people, you're going to have conflict. Hello. That's what it is. We're humans. We're fallible, right? We're not perfect. So you're going to have conflict. And so at the first sight of conflict, you cower and you're like, this isn't for me. You got some personal growth work to do. Okay. But if you lean into the conflict and you say, okay, I'm fearful to go in this conversation. I don't know how it's going to go, but it's going to teach you a lot of self-awareness. It's going to teach you about yourself. It's going to teach you about how you respond to things. It's going to teach you about how tolerant or lack of tolerance you have with how people operate, different personality types. This is so important. Okay. You do not have control over your results, guys, but you absolutely 100,000% have control over your effort. So question yourself, are you really putting forth the effort that you want to in your business? I would venture to say the large majority of us would say no, that we're not putting everything we can into our business. So therefore, you can't be upset about your results because you don't really have control over your results fully. You do to a degree, but honestly, ultimately, your results, I mean, you don't know how it's going to work out. That's the great thing about this business. You don't really, that's why it's a faith walk, because you don't really know how it's going to work out. I had no idea when I quit my job at Gold, like where I would be in 12 or 13 months from then. I had no idea. But it was me having faith that I knew that if I did the work, I worked like it depended on me and I prayed like it depended on him, that God would be faithful and God would keep his promise. And he did. May not have been in my timeline, but he did, right? So I'm going to give you six easy ways to stop overthinking. These are like step by step, okay? And then we'll end tonight. I first want you to think about this though. When you think about being first of all, how many of you identify yourself with being an overthinker? I think I may have asked that. The majority of you kind of overthink some things, at least some things, maybe not everything, but some things. Thinking about things too much is something that involves a lot of times more than words or thoughts. A lot of times it conjures up these disastrous images in our mind. How many of you think about, I have a worry wart in my household. She's called Janet Kahn, my mother. She literally thinks about, and it's because she didn't have anything else to do. So she's like worst case scenario thinker all the time, doom and gloom. Like, I mean, the worst possible thing that can happen. And in some ways, this can be disguised as I'm just very cautious. I'm just really aware. I'm trying to think of worst case scenarios, right? But then there's a part of that personality type that's like, no, but you literally are bound by fear. Like you're literally losing time off your life. You're shaving time off your life because of the anxiety that you continuously and perpetually have because you're constantly living in fear and doubt, right? So those disastrous images that we create about the worst case scenarios, it's like literally a cerebral experience when we talk about totally Enneagram 8. It's those worst case scenarios. It's kind of a Enneagram 6 too, I would think though. Yep, Adrian, Enneagram 6. It's like the skeptics. You're like, oh my gosh, what's the worst thing that can happen, right? Totally. 6s and 8s on the Enneagram. But thinking too much really does prevent you from getting anything done. And so I want you to think about these two different types of destructive thought patterns, okay? Overthinking really involves these two different destructive thought patterns. That's ruminating thoughts and incessant worrying. My mother is the incessant worrier, okay? Ruminating involves dwelling on the past, okay? So my mom's not dwelling on the past a ton. That's not who she is. She's an incessant worrier, but she's not ruminating, okay? Ruminating involves dwelling on the past. So thoughts may include things like, oh, I shouldn't have said those things in the meeting yesterday, or I shouldn't have made that comment on that person's post. Everyone must think I'm an idiot, or I'm rude, or whatever, right? Grandma's Enneagram is 2. She's a helper by default. She lives kind of sometimes in an unhealthy state because she helps in a way that's sometimes unhealthy. But she's a great human being. Proverbs 31 woman through and through. Another example is I should have stayed at my last job. I shouldn't have quit this job. I'd be happier where I am. I'd be happier than where I am now. Like that's a ruminating thought because you're constantly thinking about shoulda, woulda, coulda. Do you ever have your parents tell you that? Shoulda, woulda, coulda thinking? It's like stop the shoulda, woulda, coulda, right? It's gone, it's dead, it's old news, it's over. Keep it moving, right? But there are some people that have this destructive thought pattern that they're constantly overthinking about ruminating thoughts, things that happened in the past, dwelling on the past. My parents didn't teach me how to be confident. My insecurities have always held me back. That's another ruminating thought, thinking about the past, what happened to you as a child, right? But then there's persistent worrying or incessant worrying, right? That involves negative, often catastrophic predictions about the future. So you see the two differences between destructive thought patterns. One destructive thought pattern, you're constantly thinking about things that happened, things that were. And then the other flip side of that destructive thought pattern is thinking about and persisting to worry about things that may possibly happen in the future, right? Predictions, often catastrophic. Okay. I'm going to embarrass myself tomorrow if I do this Plexus presentation. I don't know what I'm talking about. What if I completely go blank? What if everybody else ranks up before me? Then you have a destructive thought about that. What if I actually do get to diamond or do get to emerald? What am I going to do with a team of 300, 400, 500, 700, 900 people? That is a persistent warrior. And that includes these negative, often catastrophic thoughts. Okay. So, like all habits, guys, let me admit this person, like all habits, changing your destructive thought patterns, it really can be a challenge. It's not easy to do. But with consistent practice, again, i.e., the neuroplasticity of your brain can change. You can train your brain to literally think differently. And so these are the 6 steps, the 6 simple ways. I mean, it takes practice and intentionality, but some of the 6 ways that you can stop overthinking. So number 1 is notice when you're stuck in your head. I want you to actually start to take notice when you're stuck in your head. Overthinking can become such a crazy bad habit, y'all, that you don't even recognize when you're doing it. How many of you don't even, like, now that we're talking about it tonight, you're like, I overthink constantly. But how many before this call, you didn't even recognize how often you actually overthink? That is something that a lot of people struggle with because they don't even recognize that they're doing it. So I want you to start by paying attention to the way you think so you can become aware of the problem itself. Okay. That takes intentionality, y'all. Everything that I teach on these team calls, it's you living with intention. It literally takes you thinking about it because you will literally go through life and never have a thought about these things unless someone points it out to you and says, no, capture that thought, take that thought captive. What are you going to do with that thought? When you're replaying events in your mind over and over, guys, or worrying about things you can't control, I want you to acknowledge in that moment that it is not productive. Like, this is not productive. Thinking is only helpful, y'all, when it leads to positive action. I'm going to say that again. Thinking is only helpful when it leads to positive action. So all this time that we waste thinking about worst case scenarios, catastrophic events, what if, shoulda, woulda, coulda, this, that, and the other, y'all, literally, it is unproductive. It is not helpful because if it doesn't lead to positive action, it's not a helpful thought. So there's no reason to even think it. Okay. Number 2, so number 1 was notice when you're stuck in your head. I want you to notice when you're stuck in your head. Number 2 is keep the focus on problem solving. Whoa, this is a big one. I have been around so many people who like to vent, moan, complain, hem and haw, all the things, right? Dwelling on your problems is not helpful, but looking for a solution is helpful. Okay? Dwelling on your problems is not helpful. But finding solutions and looking for them is very helpful. Looking for solutions is helpful. If it's something that you have some control over, consider how you can prevent the problem or challenge yourself to identify 5 potential solutions. So there's no reason for you to have a conversation with someone that you have a conflict with or an issue with, and all you're trying to do is just prove that you're right and prove that that person's wrong, but never really have an actual solution. So this can be prevented from happening in the future. There's zero reason for you to have a conversation like that. How many of us tend to want to do that? We just want to get on the phone and talk to people just to say, you're wrong, I'm right. How many of us get into arguments every day with people in our households to prove to that person that they're wrong and we're right? All the time. It's pride. It's called pride and ego, right? It's pride and ego. This is what we do. This is what happens. And so I really, really encourage you to think about, if it's something that you can have control over, you've got to make a decision that, hey, I am going to be the person that is going to find a solution, that is going to be proactive in my conversation with this individual to not only help to make peace with this person, bridge the gap, extend an olive branch, but also to come up with a solution so that this does not happen again. So focus on the things that you do control, you can control, like your attitude, your effort. And you can do this a lot of times it is going to take prayer. It's going to take providing resources, doing something, right? But it's going to take you being intentional. Number 3 is challenge your own thoughts. Yes, Elnita, question behind the question. It's a great book for personal accountability. And this call is a lot about personal accountability for sure. It's just going deeper, digging deeper than QBQ was, as far as like really focusing on the overthinking aspect of it instead of the personal accountability piece. But QBQ, great book. That was a book club that they just did last week with Plexus. 3 is challenge your thoughts. It's really easy, guys, to get carried away with a lot of negative thoughts. It's super easy to go down that road. So before you conclude that calling in sick, is going to get you fired, or some other crazy thought like forgetting a deadline is going to cause you to become homeless, or something really bizarre, right? Because a lot of times we go down these worst case scenarios like, oh, I'm going to have to find another job. I said this on this call and I shouldn't have, or whatever. Instead of going down that road, acknowledge that your thoughts may actually be like negative and a very exaggerative, like you're exaggerating the negativity. Okay. And a lot of times, because we're very dramatic, a lot of us are very dramatic, that we tend to exaggerate these negative circumstances, these potential negative outcomes. Okay. So remember that your emotions will interfere with your ability to look at situations objectively. Your emotions get in the way. So it's going to interfere with you thinking about something in an objective way, and you're going to start thinking about something in a more subjective way, and you don't want to do that, right? So take a step back and really look at the evidence. And I want you to ask yourself, okay, for number 3, the biggest thing I want you to carry away from this one, as far as challenging your thoughts, is what evidence, I need you to write this down. Because a lot of times we will take a thought and we will run with the thought. We got rubbed the wrong way. Someone said something in a way we didn't like. Everybody, and this runs rampant in our culture, because guess what? People don't want to talk on the phone anymore. Everybody texts, everybody's trying to read between the lines, everybody's trying to get a tone, trying to capture a tone. What do they really mean? Let me figure this out. Let me try to make an assumption for myself. And so the first thing you need to do is you need to think about, what evidence do you have that your thought is true? What evidence? Like, give me receipts. What evidence do you have that your thought is actually true? Because we will take a thought and we will run with that thought. They don't care about me. I don't want to do this anymore. I can't believe they rejected me. I can't believe they didn't respond. I mean, we run with stuff, y'all. So you need to ask yourself, what evidence do you have that your thought is true? And look for the evidence, right? Actually look for real evidence. Don't try to like reinterpret something or try to analyze them. No, like just take the hard evidence, take the facts. And also, what evidence do you have that your thought isn't true? Ask yourself both things. What evidence do you have that your thought is true? And what evidence do you have that your thought isn't true? You have to ask yourself both. Number 4 is schedule time for reflection. Okay. I want you to schedule time for reflection. This also takes intentionality. This also takes a serious amount of intentionality, like for you to literally take the time to schedule time for reflection. Okay. Stewing in your problems for long periods of time is not productive, y'all. Nothing bothers me more than like lingering a conflict. Like, no, let's face something head on. And I know they have to process differently. They have time, the way that they process and the time that takes for them to process is different. And for them to kind of come off the ledge, all that. I get all that. But like taking days and days that you're ruminating and stewing on something before you actually face the problem is not productive, y'all. So face the fear and just do it. Just have the hard conversation. But brief reflection is helpful. Okay. So I want you to know there's a difference between the two. So stewing on your problems for long periods of time is not productive, but brief reflection can be helpful. Thinking about how you could do things differently or recognizing potential pitfalls, y'all, it can help you to perform better in the future. So I really want you to be intentional about reflecting on, okay, I just had this tough conversation with this individual. Let me think about how I could handle this differently in the future. That requires you being intentional about your own reflection time. Incorporate 20 minutes of thinking time, y'all, specifically 20 minutes of thinking time in your daily schedule. I really like I have a big checklist that I write every day for my work, for my work day. And every day I like to schedule time where I do my devotion, I do prayer, I do my gratitude journal. And then I also have just time that I'm reflecting. I'm thinking about, okay, all of the conversations I had yesterday, how did that go for me? Like, how did that day go? I reflect on that and I think about, how would I do it differently? Would I change something? Would I do something differently? Like, what would I do? And I really am intentional about thinking about that so I don't have those future pitfalls. Okay. That is scheduling time for reflection. Okay. When your time is up, like, and I would say you really need to uh, time yourself on this, like give yourself 20 minutes, like put it on your phone, give yourself 20 minutes. When your time is up, you really need to move on to something else, because the other issue that you'll have is the pendulum will swing the other way and you'll be like, you go down this rabbit hole. And if your bent is already negative, then you start thinking, well, how can I, oh my God, then you start beating yourself up about why I didn't handle like this. I should have handled it like that. Then you're 2 hours later thinking about, oh, woe is me. I should have done this. What is this person thinking of me? Oh my gosh, I should have done this differently. And so when you start overthinking things outside of your scheduled time, guess what? You got to just remind yourself that you need to wait until you're thinking time again. A perfect example is something that I've told you many times that I do in our marriage. We have a check-in time. So every week, my husband and I have a check-in, and so we don't have the luxury of just complaining about every little annoying thing that each other does all week long. Because if I still have that grievance at the end of the week when we do this particular check-in, then that's when I'll talk about it. And guess what happens? Guess what happens at the end of the week during check-in? I've had probably 15 things that annoyed me all week long, and I probably have one thing that I still want to talk about after the week is over. Because I just realized, like, life is too flipping short. People are dying left and right. People are sick. People are unemployed. People are not able to chase their dreams, not living a diamond life. And I'm going to complain about X, Y, and Z? No. That's what it means to schedule time for reflection. So this kind of forces you, that our scheduled check-in, it forces me to reflect on, Robin, am I really being petty Betty? I need to think about that, right? So that forces me to do that. So schedule that time for reflection. Number 5 is learn mindfulness skills. This is huge. Okay. It's impossible to rehash yesterday or worry about tomorrow when you're living in the present. Absolutely impossible. I'm going to say that again. It is impossible to rehash yesterday and worry about tomorrow when you're living in the present. You need to be focused on living in the present, today, in the hour, in the moment, in the actual 24 hours that you have been given. That's it. Okay. Mindfulness will help you to become more aware of the here and now. Okay. So just like any other skill, y'all, mindfulness takes practice. And honestly, over time, it can decrease your overthinking. So you can learn mindfulness. They have mindfulness classes, they have mindfulness books, they have mindfulness apps, they have mindfulness courses and videos. Just go, like, do a Google search, go to YouTube. All of this stuff is available to you for you to learn mindfulness skills. But it's literally, it's the concept of living in the present moment. Okay, living in the present moment. One thing that helps you live in the present moment, though, is for you to be intentional about the time that you are living in the present. So that's why you need to have a schedule. That's why you need to have a planner. That's the reason why you need to have those things accounted for. Because if you're just kind of fumbling through life, then you're going to look and be like, oh, I was living in the present, all right, but I have nothing intentionally that I was doing, right? So the stuff goes hand in hand, right? It's not mutually exclusive. And finally, number 6 is change the channel. Okay. We talked about soundtracks. We talked about playing these tapes in your head, right? Creating these tapes and playing these tapes over and over in your head. Telling yourself to stop thinking about something is going to backfire. You can't just tell yourself to stop thinking about something. The more you try to prevent a thought from entering your brain, the more likely it is to keep popping up. Does that make sense, y'all? So telling your brain to just stop thinking about it ain't going to work, is my point. It's going to backfire on you. You need to change the channel in your brain by changing your activity. Okay. So you have to do this in the moment, changing the channel. You need to start exercising, whatever it is, like, to get your mind off of it. Exercise, engage in another conversation on a completely different subject. Start doing a work project, do something around the house, something that is going to distract you, because that's going to help you to change the channel. Doing something different will put an end to a lot of the barrage of negative thoughts that enter your brain. Okay. So train your brain, y'all. Paying attention to the way that you think, it can really help you to become more aware of your bad mental habits. And that is what's going to be so amazing about Atomic Habits, which is our new book study for the month of September. Get the book, start reading it. I'm telling you, it is such an amazing read. Just the first chapter is mind blowing. I mean, it's like, whoa, like I can't believe that I've been living my life adopting such horrible habits, right? And it's going to help you to actually work on these bad habits and replace them with really good, healthy habits. And honestly, the difference between a successful person and one that hasn't experienced as much success and fulfillment in life is simply by their habits, right? It's literally your habits. So train your brain, pay attention to the way you think. It's really going to help you to become more aware, you become more mindful, to become more solution oriented, to become less negative, and obviously and ultimately to stop overthinking. So I hope this was beneficial for you guys. I finished right in the nick of time. I always want to make sure I'm done at 8:50. Overthinking. We all want to move the needle in the other direction, to do less of that and live more intentionally in the present moment. So you guys have a great rest of your night. Thanks so much for hopping on. Love you guys. Bye, y'all.
Thanks, Rob.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Robin.
And everybody.